This is going to have to change for Georgia to have some real success in 2024.
Yeah, I know this is going to sound really obvious because this is something we talk about before every game, but Georgia has to establish a run game. They really need as healthy as possible Trevor Etienne helping out Cash Jones and Nate Frazier in this ball game because I just think if Carson Beck's out there throwing the ball 40, 45 times, mistakes are going to be made. And we're looking at 2 to 3 more interceptions because that is what you're going to get from Carson Beck when you ask him to throw it 40 plus times in a game. So I think if he limits the turnovers, and I'm not expecting him to play mistake-free football because we said in another video, Ole Miss has a solid defense, especially that defensive front, and I expect them to give Georgia's offensive line and Carson Beck all, not all types of trouble, but some trouble. So I can see Carson making some mistakes if he's throwing the ball 40 times, Ryan, but I think Georgia wins this game if they can establish a run game, make things easier for him so he's not pressing, so he's not throwing in double coverage. He's not trying to play hero ball on the road against another good quarterback who's also trying to sling it. If Georgia can establish the run game, keep that Ole Miss offense on the bench, I think Georgia's got a really good chance to pull off the victory on the road.
Yeah, I mean, the narrative out there right now is that Carson Beck is Georgia's problem. Is that he is what's holding Georgia back. It's true to an extent. There's truth in that, and he's not playing well. But parts of what you're saying, there's an article on Dawg Post this week that's got a little bit of a deeper dive, and it's going live on Wednesday. But they're not running as well as they usually do as a program. They're running fewer times. I don't know if that's because they're not running as well as they usually do, or if they want more of an emphasis on the passing game, but there's a combination of Carson is throwing the ball a ton. All right, I've talked about it a little bit with each of you. He is going to destroy the pass attempts record at this rate. He is averaging 36 plus pass attempts per game. Stetson's is 456, I think, pass attempts in a season. He did it in 15 games. Carson's going to have 470, 480 in about 12 or 13 games. It's going to be well over 500 by the time this is all said and done. They're throwing him more. They put 40 pass attempts in 4 different games this season, close to 50 in 2 of them. One of them was 50. And in those are the games where he's throwing the interceptions. Like Matt's saying, they're also just not running as well. There's a certain point where you have to question, is the offensive line just not quite as good as we thought? A couple of injuries. They rotate around a little bit, but Georgia's averaging fewer than 5 yards per carry right now. That doesn't happen a lot. And the narrative heading into the season, and I bought into it, and I agreed with it, and I fueled it a little bit. I thought the run game was going to be better than it was last year because it seems like a year ago it dropped off a little bit. But then you go back and look at the numbers. They started running the ball really well in the second half of the season. Kendall Milton started to get going. Edwards and Milton each had over 800 yards and 13 and 14, 27 rushing touchdowns between the two of them. So that is not happening this season. And a lot of those goal line touchdowns aren't happening this season. Why? They're not getting in the red zone as often as they used to because they're turning the ball over, because they're throwing the ball more, because they're not running the ball as well. So the problem partially is Carson Beck, but I think gets rooted in some other things. The Georgia's offense as a whole is just not playing up to what we thought it was going to heading into the season.
All right, so a lot of good stuff there. I mean, it seems like Georgia's running a little bit better lately. It's been okay. I mean, the Texas game, they really didn't run it effectively well. They had 3.6 yards a game there. They were against Auburn, they were 3.8. State, they were 5. Texas 3.6. Then the Gators 4.4. You know, Georgia, you're much more used to under Kirby, more like the Mississippi State game where they went 29 for 146. At the beginning of the season, of course, the first 4 Power 5 games, just forget Tennessee Tech, they were at 4.2 per carry. These last 4 games, they've been 4.2, slightly lower, 4.2. What's saving Georgia, y'all, is a couple of things. First of all, they do need to run the ball better, and it would be curious at this stage to me just to see, Matt, what's it actually going to be like when all the people that they thought they would have in this run game are all there at the same time? Because that's happened during the Tennessee Tech game, the start of the Kentucky game, and the start of the Florida game, and that's it. So it's not really been the bulk of the time. I mean, Etienne I thought would be a home run hitter. That's not happened. I think he'll play this week. We'll see. Then you, of course, miss Ratledge and Wilson and all this stuff. But there's two things that say Georgia this season. A, when Carson turned it over 11 times in 3 games, the other team scored 24 points. That's it. Not 70 or 77. They scored 24. The Gators scored 10 off turnovers, and then Alabama and Texas both scored 7. So Georgia really, in theory, could have more losses than they have because of the turnovers. Secondly, y'all, they didn't, people are having a hard time running on Georgia. Clemson, 46 yards. State, 79 yards. Texas, 29 yards. So there's multiple times where you have sub 500 games for the sub 100 games for the other team. The Gators ran enough. Auburn couldn't throw, so all they were doing was running. Alabama had the best, total, which was 173 plus the passing, which was insane. I feel like, 374 yards, I believe. So 547 yards for them. Georgia has got to, and the reason why this is all happening is they're not doing like they want to do. They want to run if they can. Everybody does in this league, Matt. This is a power league. But the defense is going to get tired at some stage. I'll throw it to you with this. They've asked Carson to do a lot. Now we've seen Nate Frazier come along and play more. Let's just see what ETN does. Cash Jones, I don't know when the Robinsons are going to get back. Now Dwight Phillips is getting involved. Maybe I don't know. But it needs to be that, and my take is you do whatever you have to do to win. But it sure would be easier on Georgia if they were not throwing it 40 times a game.
Yeah, it's tough to throw interceptions when you're running the football, but they just got to run it a lot better. But again, going into this season, Roger Robinson was a guy I continued to hear about, just a bowling ball of a running back, a chain mover, right? A tackle breaking machine. And we haven't seen him. He's been injured. And so I think they kind of wanted to build this team around 2 powerful backs with a dynamic back like Trevor Etienne and young backs that they don't have to rely on against the Gators and against Ole Miss on the road. But that's the predicament they're in right now. And I do think part of that is on Carson, who knows, hey, I've got a freshman running back here. Cash Jones is great, but, it's just Cash Jones, and you don't have those 2 bowling ball backs behind you to rely on. So I don't know if Mike's asking Carson to do more of this or that, but they got to be more explosive. But then I also think, how many teams have an explosive run game right now? I think linebackers at the collegiate level are so fast and athletic now that every team is, looking right now as, where's our explosiveness in the run? I don't see a lot of 50, 60-yard runs in college football this year. And maybe I'm just missing them, but I don't. Ashton Genty's great, right? And he does that for Boise State, but not in the SEC. So it's very tough to be explosive in the run game now more than ever, I think, because defenses, Ryan, are so athletic and they move so fast and they're so well coached. Georgia's hard to run on, but a lot of teams are hard to run on, and Ole Miss is one of them. So Georgia has got to find a way to get that running game going somehow, some way, and they're going to have to do it with a limited backfield because Carson Beck, again, cannot throw the ball 45-plus times in this game. That's going to be real trouble.
Yeah, they just don't have the guys that they thought they were going to have, but that happens, and that's happened to Georgia, and they have to adapt to that, right? They did it without George Pickens and people in the past. Nick Chubb has gotten hurt. It happens. So they have to do it with who they have each week, and this week that may or may not be ETN, but it's almost obvious at this point. I think it is obvious that is going to help their offense tremendously. But
what is
just running the ball better. It would make things easier. You saw the way that they play. Like, look at the Auburn game, right? Super vanilla, a lot of short passing, a lot of just dinking and dunking down the field, running the ball. Strong defensive performance, right? Limiting explosive plays for the most part. That's what Georgia wants. That's the kind of football game Kirby wants, is the way that the Auburn game went down. I think that if they could play like that's what they need to do. They need to keep it easy for Carson Beck. They need to wait to dial things up downfield. And, I don't know what it will take for them to start running better. Is it a matter of the backs not seeing the holes, or is it's probably a combination of all
It's
the
a
things Matt was
matter of
saying
the
too.
back
The
that they thought
defense.
they. I'm sorry, Ryan.
Yeah, they don't have the backs that they
They
thought
don't
they
have
had.
the
But
back that they. I mean, Trevor Etienne has not been as good as I thought he would be, but that doesn't mean he won't in the very near future. I think Frazier could be really good, but the guy is dealing with learning how to play in this offense, which means you have to block. It's just not been cohesive, and so they've basically y'all said to Carson, "Hey, can you get us to 7-1?" And he's like, "Yeah, I can do that," and he has. And just to like inject a little bit of sanity here too. I don't think we're saying crazy things at all. Although we are looking at the one thing we feel like they've got to do better, y'all. But the last 4 games they've played, they won by double digits. Now it didn't feel like that against Florida, but they weren't. I'm trying to think of a better example. I mean, like it wasn't Ohio State coming down the field on Oregon to win it. Like Georgia won the Florida game with fourth quarter surge. They scored 28 points in the fourth quarter against the Gators. They scored 28 points, not fourth quarter, excuse me. What was the stat, Ryan? Second half,
second
28
half,
points
28
against
points
the Gators.
against Clemson as well.
And I don't know how many they scored against Alabama, but it wasn't a couple,
It was also at least 28 points.
Right. So
So
it was significant. It might have been 24. I'm not sure.
So-
20 something. So I don't. Are they a second half team? I mean, they didn't score against Kentucky hardly at all.
Well,
go ahead, Matt.
Say as a team, I think they're a 4-quarter team because the defense has also made a lot of key stops late in ball games in the fourth quarter. We've seen the offense play well in the fourth quarter and have a drive to either tie or take the lead, but the defense has made their stops too. So I do think that this team has played really well collectively in the fourth quarter alone, and it's helped them to clinch some tight games at the end of the ball game.
Yeah, and the thing about it is, I just want to talk about this for a little bit longer because Ole Miss's run game is okay. It's not great. It's not like one of these things where you're like, wow, I mean, they're really running the ball. They had 69 against Oklahoma. They couldn't run it against Oklahoma. Against LSU, they were at they ran it on LSU. That's the game I told y'all they should really that's the game they should have won that game. I don't know how they didn't win the game against Kentucky. They had 92. I mean, like both those teams didn't even have 100 yards rushing. It was a knife fight. I mean, it's there to some degree against Ole Miss. They're Georgia, if they can run it, y'all, Ryan. That's how you control games, and we're so used to that with Nick and Sony, and then Elijah, and I mean they've got really good running backs, but the run game has not happened yet. And you still have Nate Frazier, and you still have Etienne, and Kirby's. I've been advocating for Cash Jones for some time, and he's right. They've got guys, but it's not been put together yet.
Yeah, I mean, you look at obviously Carson Beck is not Lamar Jackson. You look at like the Ravens in the NFL, and what do they do really well? They run the ball. They have freaks that can do it, but they completely control football games. You think about the teams with a dominant run game, they just control the clock. The defense is rested. There are a lot of benefits to it. It's pretty obvious. They're just not running the ball as well as they used to. I think that they're putting too much on Carson Beck. I really do. Now, there's the other part of it that's interesting to me. In a lot of these games, and I'd have to go back and watch. They come out with the mindset, we're going to air this thing out.
Yeah.
Right? It's not just, hey, we're adjusting to the fact that we're not running well. That's kind of the plan from the get-go. It was against Texas. It was against Alabama. It was against Kentucky. They came out and they wanted to air it out. So maybe that's due to what they're seeing in practice during the week, and they know that they're just not running the ball as well. But that to me kind of says, okay, well, this might not change that much.
Well, I'll say this quickly as I try to remember what I was gonna say for a second. But they do a lot of those quick screens and quick passes to Dom Lovett. Extension of the run game. Kirby talks about that all the time, but I do think Mike Bobo does a good job of getting Dylan Bell involved in the run game with those reverse handoffs and those jet sweeps with Arian Smith. We saw, every once in a while, or it feels like half the time they try that, they're getting 15, 20 yards. And I think they, kind of started that a little bit in the second half against the Gators. I think it was Dylan Bell with like a 25-yard run and, getting the ball to Arian Smith, whether it's handing it off to him. Again, the speed is the speed. So I do think Mike has done a good job of trying to be creative somewhat in the run game when they're not doing it organically, naturally. But, Dom Lovett had 7, 8 catches against the Gators. I mean, that's a guy that, if they're not running the ball, they can still be like, okay, just get it to Dom Lovett out there and let Oscar block for him on the perimeter. And that's one way we can get yards, through the ground, but also in a way through the air. So they got to keep getting creative in that way.
Yeah, and like you said, it's getting creative. They may not just be able to line up and bully people. It's going to be hard to do that this week against Ole Miss. Now, Ole Miss seemed to get tired against LSU. I will say that. Even the Arkansas. I mean, Arkansas was moving it fine, but when you turn it over in your own end zone and that game got away from Arkansas quick on Saturday, and but Georgia ain't Arkansas, and that's the challenge for Ole Miss is, are you ready to do this all the time? Georgia's been really tested. Ole Miss has too, and the LSU game, the Kentucky game, I would say at South Carolina. At this point in the season, everybody's been kind of tested, but this is a really important game for both these teams. If the Rebels lose this game, their season is over. If Georgia loses, they can't lose again, and they have Tennessee the next week. So this is a real important moment in Georgia's season and for Kirby. I don't know if the fans understand that the same way they did with the Texas game, but it is definitely true, and I would imagine that's definitely being the case at Butts-Mehre this week. All right, thanks for watching. We'll see you on the next video.